So my go-to method for simple and quick miniatures painting has always been dry brushing. I think artistically it creates a cool minimalistic style that is very easy to achieve regardless of your skill level. I have here on the left an officially Sundrop miniature versus the one on the right, which is the dry brush do-it-yourself version. There is a difference between the two. However, for a non-professional painter like me who's also very cheap, this technique has saved me an enormous amount of time, frustration, and money. More importantly, learning these basics can be a springboard to becoming a better painter. I myself am very new at painting, but was able to paint what you see on screen using the exact same techniques that I'm about to go into. All you'll need are some paintbrushes, a bit of water, and some acrylic paint. Many painters like using a special kind of paint called primer for the base or the first layer of the mini. However, I've tested primer against just regular black paint and I saw no real difference, at least not in this context, so use either. I'll be using the cheaper of the two, black paint. You'll need a paint in the primary color you want your miniature to be and a paint in a lighter shade of that color. White is good for the latter because you can just add white to any color to bring up the tone. For this Tainted Grail figure, I'll be trying to match the colors to the official Sundrop colors, which looks like a mix of brown and khaki. And while not necessary, I do recommend getting a matte sealer to protect your minis after you painted them. Check the video description. Wet your brush a little and start applying either your black paint or your black primer as your first layer. Try to get every crevice of your mini because believe me, it's very noticeable on the final product if anything goes unpainted. I usually paint half the mini, set it down to dry, and then come back to paint the second half so my hands aren't disturbing any wet paint. After your mini is fully dried, comes the dry brushing. You're gonna take a different brush from before, make sure it's a brush that's not wet, that's very important, and then get some of your primary color onto your brush. FYI, I think I added a drop of white to this brown and mixed it because it was too dark. Now on a paper towel, start wiping the paint off the brush so that there's barely any paint left on the brush. Wipe in all directions. Sometimes there will be hidden pockets of paint that you don't want. With most of the paint off, take your brush and furiously swipe away at your mini. I like to think of it as Bob Ross's technique of beating the devil out of it. If you did this correct, you will see the details of your mini immediately start to highlight. If your mini is mottled with paint, you probably have too much paint on your brush. You can always clean your mini to restart this process. If you don't see the details being highlighted, it's likely because the paint you chose is too dark. When you paint on top of black, like we are doing here, you have to be careful because black distorts and darkens the colors on top. Some darker colors may not appear at all. Lighten up the color by mixing in a little white and try reapplying. There is also the possibility where the brand of paint you chose just doesn't stick to minis. I've had this issue before, try a different brand of paint. This is what the mini looks like after you dry brush everywhere, and honestly, I think it looks pretty good and probably would just call it a day, but let's add a few more layers of dry brushing. This is going to create more color depth. I'm actually going to apply 2 more layers of dry brushing, but the number of layers is really up to you. Each subsequent layer of dry brush should be lighter than the color before it. Either use a lighter color or mix it yourself by adding white to the color you just used. I added a drop of yellow here to try to recreate the Sundrop effect, but it was ultimately kind of pointless because I didn't see too much of a difference. Now again, dry brush. Only this time, the amount of time you spend dry brushing should be less, or in other words, brush less paint on than the last layer. You want to focus on where your mini is jutting out the most. This is usually a head, clothings, or weapons. Doing this will create a layering effect that will add more color depth as well as simulate lighting. And I went for 1 more layer here, same rules as before, lighter tone of paint than the previous layer and even less dry brushing than before. This time only the pointiest parts of the mini are getting painted. Now for the optional step of sealing your mini. Spraying an outer seal will protect your minis from use. In an outdoor area or by a window if you live in the city like me, set your mini down. Shake your can and from 1 foot to 2 foot away, spray your mini in quick bursts. If you're too close or spray too aggressively, your mini will look glossy. Once it dries, flip the mini and repeat. Make sure you get all sides and make sure you do not breathe in any of the fumes. You're trying to coat your mini, not your lungs. I'm not going to be demonstrating the spraying process here because the sealer is just way too close to my camera, but just follow the directions and you'll be okay. And that's it. This took about 10 minutes including drying time, though a fan did most of the heavy lifting there. What I really like about this method is that you can blow through an entire box of minis in less than a few hours. You could paint it in the morning and play it in the afternoon. Now, are these an exact reproduction of the official Sundrops? No, there are some differences, mainly in color, but I'd consider those differences minor. Awaken Realms have stated that Sundrop uses washes, which this method does not, but really, considering how expensive washes are, I think this method is far cheaper and easier. If you have any questions or comments, leave a message below. For the written version of this tutorial, visit miniaturespalace.com or check out my other videos.